Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leathercraft. Chapter 6, we are almost there. One more chapter and our journal covers are complete. Now sewing, just like chisel work, a couple of easy tricks to make our stitch line very consistent, but also too, it's going to make it easy on our hands. Now we're going to use what's called a saddler stitch. We've all seen a machine stitch or a lock stitch. We've got this in every hole. Problem is, and we've all seen it, one side pops, whole thing unravels. Not going to happen with a saddler stitch, and we'll see why. This is a back and forth, but exceptionally easy. In fact, with our groove line, makes a great border. But the reason we drop in a groove line is because when we're done sewing, we're going to tap down our stitch line. It's going to sink down into that groove. It's going to make it virtually impossible for it to snag. In fact, if you break a stitch on a saddler stitch, you may never know it. Now, anything I use in this video, weaverleathercraft.com, or look below, we've got links there, take you straight to our website. So let's do this. I've got our sewing horse set up, ready to go over here. Let's jump over here and knock out our sewing. All right, we are set and ready to hand sew. Now, again, couple of tricks, couple of things we need to talk about. First off, with our thread, I need about 3.5, maybe 4 times my length. That sounds like a lot, but in the old days, we used flax. So we'd sew 6 inches, tie a knot, start again, sew 6 inches. What a headache. Nowadays, thread is inexpensive enough to where we can have ample thread. What I want to avoid is coming around all the way back to my starting point and I have 2 little nubs of thread that I have to tie a knot with, all right? But we're not going to go all the way around. For the video, we're going to start on the first hole inside of our flap, and we're going to sew right around to here, the first hole outside, and then we'll drop a little knot right in here. It will be virtually unnoticeable. But 2, like I said, 3, maybe 3.5 times our length, that's still going to be about 60 inches. So the trick there, let's just choke up on our thread and then we'll pay that out as we go. Now again, old school way of doing this is to actually take my thread, my needle, and split my thread so it locks on there. I don't want to do that because again, I want to pay thread out as I go. That keeps me from having to really stretch far to tighten a knot. All right, next big trick. I don't want to sew down and back because first off, I'm going to be pulling left, right, left, right, left, right. That's going to give me this bizarre little serpentine thing. But coming back, same thing. But the bigger problem, every time I go through a hole coming back, I run the risk of splitting a thread. I don't want to do that. The way we're going to do it, we never run that risk. All right, so first hole inside my flap, easy enough to see here. Now, with our chisel, I've chiseled from my top. So therefore, these holes, they're funnel shaped. But on the back side, they actually pucker. So what I want to do, needle on both ends of my thread. I'm going to take my needle, go through that first hole, 1 needle, first hole. Easy to remember. All right, let's pull that through, and then I'm going to equalize out my thread. All right, cool, easy enough. Now, second hole, I'm going to lead with my right. I'm right-handed, therefore I'm going to put my top grain to my right, so therefore my funnel is there, therefore my needle almost falls into that hole. So I'm going to work my needle in, open that hole. Now with my left hand, I'm going to drop my needle in from the back side. Push it through. We're simply going to make an X. I'm going to move my fingers from the end of the needle to the front, and we're going to pull that through. Now, unlike sewing down and back, when I get to here, I've got a nice equal tension there. All right, second hole. Let's come in from the front, open that hole up, drop our needle in from the back, make an X, and there we go. We have another stitch. Let's do one more. Notice how easy that is. The needles literally fall into the hole. If I start from my right or my top, or if you're left-handed, just flip this over. But look at that. Already we've got a very clean, very consistent stitch line. Now, when I hit my corner, I just keep going. Our holes are clean and tight and close, won't be an issue. So I'm going to sew all the way around to the first hole outside of our panel. Now, when we come down from 2-ply down to 1-ply, we need to adjust our tension just a little bit because I don't want to pull too hard. Now over here, no problem. That's a nice clean straight line there. But when I jump to here, I need to go a little easier on my tension because if I really pull this in, it's going to start to ripple. So I need to be cautious of that. But also too, thus far we've gotten about 3 inches, 9 inches, 3 inches, about 15 minutes, so we're doing roughly 1 inch a minute. That's great. That is great. So we're not moving as fast as a machine stitch, but we're certainly jamming right along. Now also too, our thread or our needles. Hand sewing needles do not have a sharp point on them. Our holes are pre-punched, which is good. That saves us a lot of time and, in all honesty, a little pain. So, getting close to our corner, just another couple of minutes to there. And we're coming around to our last stitch here. One thing though, and this is important, we could simply sew our pockets in, and that would look fine. But the reason we add a stitch line to a single ply is for strength, but also too, with say an oily side or leather similar to what we're working on here, this chrome tan, it can stretch a little bit. So having that extra stitch along there shores that up, reinforces that, but also too, keeps it from stretching, which is one thing we're going to want with certain types of leather. Okay, cool. So I'm down to that last hole before my pocket. So with my right thread, I'm going to bring that in under that front pocket. I'm not going through both plies. All right, so let's pull that through. Same on the top. I'm going to come in from this side, but I'm not going to go through both panels or both plies. So we've got that. All right, let's tug on that just a little bit. Now, I'm going to tie a square knot. So all I have to do here is right over left, circle around. Let's draw that down. Right up under there. Cool. Okay. Now, left over right, draw that around, sink that in. There we go. All right. Now, there's a little bump there, but once we hammer our stitch line down, that's going to disappear. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm simply going to pull these back down under there, hold my knife there, I'm going to lift my thread over my knife blade. I'm not going to cut down, I'm going to pull my thread up. That's going to pop that in there. Look at that. Very clean and tight. Well, thus far, I could not be happier with our stitch line. Look at that. Very clean, very tight. Now, it's got a little bit of a ripple right here. It's not going to be an issue. When we hammer this down, that's going to flatten out and be beautiful. All right, so same process. I'm going to start one hole in here. That way, I don't have a double thread there. I literally am going from one thread per hole to one thread per hole. So I'm going to come all the way back around here, and our journal is done. There we go, and let's tighten that down, run our thread across there, easy enough. All right, so looking at my notes, took about 40 minutes to sew this, much slower than a machine, but you know what? It's about $3 grand this side of a machine, and also too, no need for electrical, pneumatic, or space. And that stitch line just looks phenomenal. Couldn't be happier with that. Now, one big point though, our horse, the sewing horse. If you don't have room for this, or if it's not in the budget, we've got a good alternative. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But with the sewing horse, it actually comes with a seat. But to me, that puts my stitch line too high. It puts it above my chest, which isn't comfortable. If I stand when I sew, that puts my stitch line right here. Very normal, very comfortable position, almost a desk height. That's what I'm looking for. But also too with the pony, quick release. Well, that looks very good. Couldn't be happier. Now, let's do this. I'm going to set up with our veg tan, and then we will finish out our sewing. All right, we are set and ready to go with our veg tan. Now, a couple of points again, small details, a little bit different than our field journal. We're going to use a nice bright white stitch line. I just love that. That really stands out. It's hand sewn. I wanted to stand out, but that really gives it a nice detail. So we're going to use a bright white thread. Now, also too, our Sharpie marks. I've got my left panel on the left side of my portfolio. Those match up. But also too, what I've got is a needle. Needle in my bottom corner, top corner. We glued these, but we had to pop these apart just to dye them. So once I get my needles in, I can drop my clips in. But the cool thing here is I only need about 1 inch of stitch line. Then I can pull out my needles, drop my clips, and everything is going to fall into place from there. Now, only a few inches needed here. So let's start off. We're going to do exactly the same thing we did for our field journal. We're going to sew from the first hole inside of our flap around to just short of our flap. And again, easy to remember, first hole, one needle. There we go. All right. Now also too, as we move through this leather, first off, it's going to be a little harder to get our needles through. Veg tan, it's a little more body, but also we've added dye. So just lead with your right or left hand, open that hole up, and then we get a good stitch each time, every time. So let's make a couple of passes, but also too, as we move through our veg tan, since we dyed this, we're going to pick up a little dye right here on the thread. So maybe add a little extra leader to that as we measure. So, you know, 3.5, maybe a little bit more for your length, all right? There we go. That is starting to look really nice, all right? So I'm going to sew this. Oh, there's a clip. Hey, a self-removing clip. Those are very cool. So, all right, looking good already. We'll flip this over, take a look at the front, but it looks just as good as the back. All right, so I'm going to sew all the way around to that corner. We'll tie a knot and then sew back around and complete the hand sewing on our portfolio. All right, our first knot, that sinks in nicely. Very good. Now, one thing that's making me crazy, I don't know what that is. I don't know where it came from. All right. Anyway, probably not going to be terribly noticeable. That is on the back flap. All right. Now, we've come down to here. Couple of points, though. First off, as you sew, you'll notice you start to get some wax on your fingers. Just keep a rag close by. That way we can clean off our fingers. But two, thus far, a little bit harder to sew our veg. It's taking a little more time. But two, let's take a look at this because I saw this as we were going by. See if I can find it. Where we had to add our little spacer, that one chisel, that's right in there. We are never going to see that. Well, in fact, we might. No one else ever will. In fact, that stitch line looks great. All right, so what I'm going to do, start up again right here, first hole. I'm going to work my way back around, and this will be hand sewn. And coming down to our last hole, let's just cut through one ply there and one ply here. Now, this one's taking some actual time to hand sew. But the one thing we want to keep in mind, say this took an hour and 20 minutes to hand sew. Well, we're going to enjoy this for 10,000 times the amount of time it took to hand sew or actually to produce the whole project. All right, so let's pull that down. There we go. All right, we're going to drop in. Same thing, square knot. Right over left, circle around, drop that down. Now, left over right, circle around, drop that down in there. Very nice. All right, let's clip that. Very good. Now we've got two tails there. We'll tuck those down in there. When we hammer that down, that will be no issue. All right, so let's take a look at this and see what it looks like. Well, yet again, another step. Could not be happier with. We'll take care of that little tail right there. But for that stitch line, that looks good. Now, we've got one more step. We're going to hammer this down, clip our corners, and then we are ready for Chapter 7. All right, so with this, now we've got a little tab there. It's making me crazy. It's a little long, so let's go ahead and clip that off. There we go, and then now we can tuck that down in there, and it should stay. All right, so let's do this. Sometimes we can have a little wax build up on our thread. So I'm going to take just a suede brush, just very easily brush along my stitch line. Make sure I've got no additional wax there. There we go. All right. So next I'm going to take just a tack hammer. A mallet is fine, but I don't want a large enough hammer to where I'm going to leave marks on the face of my leather. So all I'm going to do is hammer down my stitch line. There we go. All right. So what we're doing is that stitch is now sunk below the top grain. I can't feel it at all. But also too, I've closed my holes up, and it's also brought out a little bit of the white in that thread. So I'm going to lightly hammer all the way around, and then we're going to clip our corners and jump over to our journal cover. All right, very nice. Well, that is just beautiful, okay? One more step here. I'm going to drop down just a piece of padding and one of our punch boards. So all I'm going to do is on my corners, I'm just going to clip that outside just enough to where that's not going to dog ear for us. And with the wax, or with the Pro Dye or the oil dye, no issue there. That dye has wicked through nicely. There we go, clean that up just a little bit. Well, our journal cover, or our portfolio cover, is almost done. Chapter 7, we're going to do one more detail. All right, so let's jump over to our field journal. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So first off, we're going to brush. Going to brush my stitch line just to get any excess wax off. Then we're going to tap this down. Now I need to be a little more careful here because I can really ding this leather. So when I go to my hammer, I want to go just a little bit more lightly. There we go. That looks good already. Okay, so I'm going to work my way all the way around on this one, clip my corners, and you know what? We're on to chapter 7. There we go, clip our last corner. All right, very nice, hammering that down, clean and tight. Now, I mentioned earlier, with a sewing horse, if you don't have room, or if it's not in the budget, you can make your own sewing pony, tabletop. Now, you can tell this is mine, and while I have done some sewing on this, but all this is 2 carriage bolts and 2 2x4s. But what I like about this is I can C-clamp this onto my table in a number of different positions, so I can always keep my sewing at a comfortable height. All right, follow me to chapter 7. Let's add the finishing touches to our portfolio and our field journal.